They say time is the most valuable thing we have. But what if one morning it just stops? Not for everyone, just for one person, one girl, one family, one future. This is the story of Sierra LaMar, a bright, vibrant 15-year-old who left her house one ordinary morning in 2012 and never came back. Her name has echoed through the hills of Morgan Hill, California ever since. And the haunting question still lingers. What happened to Sierra? Let's rewind to the beginning. It's March 16, 2012. It's a Friday. A crisp spring morning in the suburban outskirts of Santa Clara County. Birds are chirping. Teenagers are getting ready for school. Everything is normal. For Sierra, it should have been a day like any other. She wakes up at her home in Morgan Hill, a quiet residential area nestled between rolling hills and farms. It's a picturesque place, seemingly safe. The kind of town where neighbors wave and people know each other by name. Sierra was in her sophomore year at Sobrato High School, a typical teenager in many ways, bubbly, ambitious, active on social media. She loved singing, playing the ukulele, and taking selfies. She had dreams of becoming a makeup artist, maybe even a model someday. Her smile lit up the room, and her laugh was the kind you couldn't help but join in on. She wasn't perfect. She was a teenager. There were struggles at home, arguments with her mom, and the ache of missing her dad, who had moved out after a divorce. But she was trying, really trying, to adjust. That morning, she texted a friend around 6:45 a.m. Then, at 7:11 a.m., she tweeted, "Can't wait for this week to end." It was a small, seemingly insignificant post, but looking back, it would be her last. Sierra packed her Juicy Couture bag and left the house at around 7:15 a.m., supposedly walking to the bus stop down the street. It was less than a 10-minute walk. She never made it. The school bus came and went. She was marked absent, and no one knew where Sierra LaMar had gone. When Sierra's mom, Marlene LaMar, got home from work later that day, Sierra wasn't there. At first, it didn't feel like an emergency. Maybe she had gone out with friends. Maybe she forgot to call. Teenagers do that. But by 6 p.m., Marlene began to panic. She started calling friends. No one had seen Sierra. She tried her phone. No answer. Multiple calls. Straight to voicemail. Panic grew. By 9 p.m., Marlene called the Santa Clara County Sheriff's Office to report her daughter missing. The investigation began immediately. Deputies arrived at the home. They searched the house, talked to neighbors. They canvassed the neighborhood, retraced the path Sierra would have taken to the bus stop. But nothing. It was as if Sierra had vanished into thin air. By the next morning, March 17th, things escalated. Authorities pinged her phone and found a signal about 2 miles from her house. There, lying in an open field near Scheller Avenue, they discovered Sierra's cell phone, screen cracked, abandoned. Nearby, her Juicy Couture bag was also found, containing clothes neatly folded inside. Odd, suspicious, as if someone had staged them or hurriedly discarded the evidence. From that point on, this wasn't just a missing persons case. It was something far more sinister. News spread quickly. Flyers, Facebook posts, local news stations. Volunteers flooded the area. People who'd never even met Sierra joined search parties, combing the nearby fields, forests, and roads. Helicopters buzzed overhead. Dogs sniffed through brush and creeks, but Sierra was gone. No witnesses, no surveillance footage, no trace. Her last tweet, "Can't wait for this week to end," took on an eerie weight. Imagine being 15, full of life, stepping out the door, just heading to school, and that's it. Gone. The world stops for your family, your friends, your community. Your name becomes a headline, a hashtag, a prayer. But where are you? The discovery of Sierra LaMar's cell phone and bag had transformed a simple missing persons report into something more terrifying. By day 2, it was no longer a question of whether Sierra had simply run away. Law enforcement knew this was an abduction. And the race to find her was now a race against time. The Santa Clara County Sheriff's Office brought in every resource they had. Canine units, undercover officers, digital forensics experts. They retraced her steps, mapping out a timeline minute by minute. They combed her phone for clues, texts, tweets, search history. Nothing suspicious. No boyfriends, no runaway plan, no evidence of emotional instability. She didn't leave on her own. And then came the break. Investigators sent Sierra's bag, clothes, and phone in for forensic analysis. DNA swabs were taken from everything. And on her bag, they got a hit. A male DNA profile, not from a classmate, not from a teacher, not from anyone in Sierra's life. The DNA matched a man already in the CODIS system, the Combined DNA Index system, because of a prior arrest. His name? Antolin Garcia-Torres. Antolin was a 21-year-old from nearby Morgan Hill, just like Sierra. He lived with his mother and had a girlfriend and a young daughter. On paper, he seemed like a quiet man, but dig deeper, and a darker past emerged. Garcia-Torres had been arrested before for shoplifting and had been linked to 3 attempted kidnappings of women in 2009, women who managed to escape, cases that had gone cold until now. Now, his DNA was on the bag of a 15-year-old missing girl. And when detectives started watching him, they noticed more. Surveillance teams followed Antolin. They noted scratches on his hands. He changed his appearance, cut his hair, and seemed nervous in public. When they finally brought him in for questioning on May 21st, 2012, 2 months after Sierra vanished, he denied everything. He said he didn't know her, had never met her. So how did his DNA end up on her bag? They pressed harder. And then, another bombshell. Investigators had quietly placed a GPS tracker on his red Volkswagen Jetta, and when they searched the car, more DNA surfaced. Sierra's DNA was found inside his trunk. The implication? Clear. Sierra LaMar had been in that vehicle. She didn't walk away from her home that day. She was taken. But here's the catch. Despite all this evidence, there was still no body, no trace of Sierra, nothing to prove exactly what had happened after she was kidnapped. No murder weapon, no confession, only DNA, suspicion, and heartbreak. For Sierra's family, hope was fading, but not gone. Her mother clung to the belief that Sierra might still be alive, maybe held captive like the victims in the Elizabeth Smart or J.C. Dugard cases. They created a website, a foundation, a movement. Help find Sierra LaMar. They begged the public for tips. They organized massive search efforts, volunteers numbering in the hundreds. Every weekend, for months. They refused to give up because a body would mean closure, and they weren't ready for that. But prosecutors, they were. In May 2012, Antolin Garcia-Torres was charged with murder, despite the absence of a body. It was a controversial move, but the evidence mounting. Sierra's DNA in his trunk, his DNA on her belongings, his sketchy history with other kidnapping attempts, a timeline that placed him in the area at the time she vanished. It was enough. But this wouldn't be a quick trial. In fact, it would drag on for years. Sierra's family waited and waited. Through delay after delay, they sat through every pretrial hearing, every legal maneuver, every excuse, but they never stopped believing that justice was possible, that their daughter, even in death, deserved to be heard. This wasn't just about one girl anymore. It was about every girl who ever disappeared without a trace. It was about fighting back against silence, against fear, against predators who think no one will notice when a young girl vanishes into thin air. 4 years. That's how long Sierra LaMar's family waited for the trial to begin. 4 years of unanswered questions, of living every day in limbo, knowing who took their daughter, but not knowing how it happened or why. But in January 2017, after countless delays and motions, the state of California versus Antolin Garcia-Torres finally went to trial. And in that courtroom, the mystery of what happened to Sierra began to unravel, piece by piece. Prosecutors stepped into the courtroom with a single objective, to prove that Sierra was no longer alive, and that Antolin Garcia-Torres was the one responsible. It was never going to be simple. There was no body, no witnesses, no direct confession. What they did have was forensic science and a haunting chain of circumstantial clues. Standing before the jury, the prosecution painted a picture of a typical teenage girl, full of life and aspirations, who was ambushed on her way to school. They alleged that Antolin, a violent predator with a troubling history, had been scouring the area for a target, that he saw Sierra, waited, then attacked. They claimed he seized her, forced her into his vehicle, that Sierra resisted, fought, but ultimately she lost. Then he silenced her, for good. Where her body ended up? Still unknown. The defense? They offered another version of events. They didn't contest that Antolin's DNA was found on Sierra's bag, or that her DNA showed up in the trunk of his car. But they argued none of it definitively proved murder. They floated the idea that Sierra may have run away, that maybe she entered the car on her own, that the evidence might have been mishandled. They emphasized the missing body. No murder. That was their claim. But the prosecution was only beginning to build their case. One after another, crime scene experts testified. They explained how strands of Sierra's hair were discovered in Antolin's trunk, tangled, suggesting force. Her DNA was found within the fibers of the trunk's carpet, deep in the lining, not just surface transfer, but embedded, smeared. Then there was her bag, a juicy couture purse, located more than 2 miles from her home, tossed into a field. Antolin's DNA was detected on its handle, on Sierra's clothes, even on her phone case. And then came a revelation from years prior. Remember those attempted abductions in 2009? 3 women took the stand. Each had survived an encounter in nearby parking lots. Each described a chillingly similar experience. A man approached with a stun gun, tried to force them into his car. One woman even managed to wrest the weapon away and escape. All 3 gave descriptions that matched Antolin Garcia-Torres, the same man now facing charges for Sierra LaMar's disappearance. The prosecution called those incidents part of a pattern, a dangerous one. A man who had tried and failed to abduct women in the past. Until, at last, someone didn't escape. March 16, 2012. Roughly 7:15 a.m. Sierra leaves her house. Antolin Garcia-Torres is already nearby. His phone activity places him along her bus route. His red Jetta is spotted by surveillance cameras. Before Sierra ever reaches the bus stop, he intercepts her, grabs her, forces her into the trunk. There's a struggle. Her hair is yanked, her clothes torn. He drives away. And from that moment on, Sierra vanishes without a trace. It was a devastating narrative, but it aligned with the facts. And for Sierra's family, seated in that courtroom, absorbing every agonizing detail, it was excruciating. Her mother, Marlene Lamar, wept throughout much of the proceedings. Her father, Steve, sat frozen, gripping the bench. They had waited years for justice. Now they were witnessing it, piece by painful piece. The defense reminded jurors there was no body, that everything else was circumstantial. They argued the DNA could have been the result of innocent transfer, that the 2009 cases were unrelated, that nobody had actually witnessed what happened to Sierra. And above all, that reasonable doubt still lingered. And in a courtroom, doubt can be enough. But during closing statements, the prosecution offered the jury one chilling truth. A girl doesn't just vanish. She doesn't crawl into someone's trunk and disappear forever by accident. Sierra LaMar was taken. She was killed. And the person who did it is sitting right here. The jury deliberated for 2 days. On May 9, 2017, they returned with their verdict. Guilty. Antolin Garcia-Torres was convicted of first-degree murder and kidnapping. He was also found guilty in the 3 2009 kidnapping attempts. The courtroom fell quiet. No cheers, no shouts, just tears, relief, and sorrow. But it wasn't the end. Next came the question, should Antolin receive life in prison or the death penalty? The verdict was final. Guilty. After 5 long years, Sierra LaMar's family finally heard the words they had long believed, that Antolin Garcia-Torres had taken their daughter and that he was to blame for her death. But even in that moment, their journey wasn't finished. The court now faced one last haunting decision. What punishment did he deserve? This phase of the trial was about more than just justice. It was about pain, about people. And it began with the ones who had suffered the most, Sierra's loved ones. Her father, Steve LaMar, addressed the courtroom and uttered words no parent should ever have to say. "You murdered my daughter. You destroyed our family." His voice trembled. His hands were unsteady. "You didn't just take her life. You took ours too." Then her mother, Marlene, the face of a tireless search, looked directly at the man who had taken her child. "I still expect her to walk back through that door. I still sleep holding her blanket. You stole a piece of my soul and buried it somewhere we can't even reach." Family members, friends, teachers, they all shared memories of a bright 15-year-old girl who adored the color pink, danced in her bedroom, and dreamed of becoming a makeup artist. A soul full of life. Now, that light? Extinguished. Yet the courtroom was divided. Some demanded the harshest sentence. Others believed another death wouldn't bring Sierra back. The defense asked the jury for mercy, not on behalf of Antolin Garcia-Torres, but for the sake of his young daughter. A cruel twist. The man who murdered a teenage girl had a daughter of his own. On June 5, 2017, after days of heart-wrenching testimony, the jury delivered their sentence. death. But because executions had been halted in California, the sentence was handed down, yet Garcia-Torres remains on death row, alone. And Sierra? Still missing. Still not found. Her body never recovered. For her family, that is the deepest wound. No grave, no farewell, just an unending void. But they chose not to be defeated. The LaMar family channeled their grief into action. They created the Sierra LaMar Foundation, dedicated to helping find other missing children. They now speak, search, and support, ensuring Sierra's legacy becomes a beacon for others lost in the dark. Her case was never just about one teenager. It reflected the stories of thousands of missing children. It exposed the shortcomings in systems, in timing, in accountability. And it ignited a nationwide awakening. How could this happen to someone like her? Sierra wasn't careless. She was simply headed to school. She vanished during a routine morning. She embodied every parent's worst fear. When her abductor was finally identified, outrage swept across the community. Protests erupted. Vigils were held. Social media lit up with hashtags, Justice for Sierra, Bring Sierra Home, Protect Our Kids. And the questions came. Why did the case take 2 years to reach trial? Why wasn't a known offender stopped earlier? Could Sierra's life have been spared? We may never get those answers. But one thing remains certain. Sierra LaMar mattered. Her foundation launched campaigns across the nation, gave support to grieving families, and helped push forward new child protection laws. Her name became a symbol of purpose. Her story, a rallying cry to never give up. Sierra loved dancing, cheerleading, and her pink Converse shoes. She wanted to leave her mark on the world. And in many ways, she did. Her case reshaped how we view missing teenagers, how we investigate disappearances, how we listen to families in pain. This wasn't just another crime. It was a wake-up call. So say her name. Tell her story. And if her case touched you, subscribe for more stories that deserve to be heard. Share your thoughts below.